At my daughter's welcome home dinner, my son-in-law's father looked me straight in the eye, pushed the chair back from the table, and said, "You know what your problem is, old man? You've never had real money, so you don't understand how things work." He smiled like he was doing me a favor explaining it. My son-in-law laughed. My daughter stared at her plate. I folded my napkin, set it beside my fork, and said, "You're probably right." He believed me. That was his first mistake. Before we go further, please subscribe to Her Quiet Heart and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. It means a great deal. My daughter had been living in Scottsdale for 3 years when I finally got an invitation to visit. Not from her, from my son-in-law. A text, 7 words. "Dad's throwing a dinner. Saturday. Come down. No, please. No, we'd love to see you." A summons dressed up as hospitality. I drove down from Flagstaff on a Friday afternoon, windows down, the desert highway stretching out ahead of me. I'd made that drive a dozen times in my working years. Back then I drove a company truck, clipboard on the passenger seat, boots dusty from whatever site I'd come from. Now I drove a 9-year-old Silverado with a cracked dashboard and a cassette adapter I still used because the radio had given out somewhere around 2019. I hadn't bothered fixing it. Silence suited me fine. My daughter married my son-in-law 4 years ago in a ceremony I helped pay for. The catering bill alone had been more than my first car. I didn't complain. She was happy, or she looked happy, and at that point I told myself that was enough. Her husband came from a different world than ours. His father had built a commercial real estate empire across the Southwest, self-made in the way that men like to describe themselves when they've had the right connections at the right moment. His name was in the lobby of 2 buildings downtown. He sat on the boards of 3 nonprofits, golfed with developers, had the kind of laugh that filled a room whether anyone found him funny or not. My daughter had grown up in a 2-bedroom house in Tucson. Her mother worked nights at the hospital. I drove long haul for 15 years, then pivoted to field inspection work when my knees got bad. We weren't wealthy, but we were solid. She never went without. She went to community college, transferred, graduated with honors. She worked hard. She married a man who, it turned out, had never needed to. The house in Scottsdale was new construction, the kind with stone facades and zero-scaping and a 3-car garage for 2 people. My son-in-law's father had put the down payment on it. I knew that from my daughter, years ago, before she stopped telling me things. She met me at the door. My first thought was that she'd gotten thin. Not a little thin. The kind of thin that creeps up on people who aren't eating well or sleeping well, who are moving through their days like they're carrying something heavy they can't set down. She smiled when she saw me, but the smile didn't climb all the way up to her eyes. "Dad." She hugged me, and I held on a beat longer than she expected. "You look tired, sweetheart. Long week. Come in." The foyer had high ceilings and marble floors and a painting on the wall that I was fairly certain no one in the house had chosen. My son-in-law appeared from the kitchen, shook my hand the way men do when they're performing politeness rather than feeling it. "Glad you made it," he said. "Traffic on the 17 bad?" "Not too bad. My parents are running a few minutes late." Of course they were. Men like his father were always a few minutes late. It established the order of things. I found my grandson in the living room, building something out of foam blocks on the carpet. He was 2.5, blonde like his mother, with her same serious expression when he was concentrating. I sat down on the floor next to him. "What are you making?" He looked up, held up a yellow block, then placed it carefully on top of a red one. "A tower," he decided. "That's a good tower." He leaned against my arm for a moment, the way small children do when they've decided you're safe. That weight, small and warm and trusting, settled something in my chest that had been loose and rattling around since the drive down. My son-in-law's parents arrived without knocking. The front door simply opened, the way it would if you owned the place, which in a certain financial sense they did. His father walked in ahead of his mother, already talking, already occupying the room. He was 65, tanned, silver hair swept back, wearing a golf shirt that probably had a brand name, stitched somewhere subtle. His wife followed in linen and gold earrings, her smile the kind that never reached the eyes and wasn't trying to. "There he is." My son-in-law's father clapped his son on the shoulder, looked past my daughter to where I was coming in from the living room, grandson on my hip. "And you must be the father." He didn't extend a hand, just studied me the way men like him study things they've already assessed. "That's right," I said. "Fletcher mentioned you're retired. What was it, construction?" "Field inspection. Before that, long-haul transport." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're not actually listening. Good honest work. The way he said honest made it sound like a consolation prize. His wife air-kissed my daughter's cheek and immediately began cataloging the room. Oh, you changed the dining chairs. The last ones were better, I think. More formal. This is a formal house. My daughter said nothing, just smoothed the front of her blouse. We sat down to dinner. My son-in-law had ordered from a restaurant rather than cooked, which I mention only because his father made a point of noting which restaurant and how much the per-person cost was, twice. My daughter had set the table herself. I noticed the way she checked each place, setting twice, adjusted the fold of a napkin, moved a glass 2 inches to the left for no reason that I could see. She was nervous, had been nervous since I arrived, actually. The kind of nervous that had become so habitual she probably didn't notice it anymore. The conversation was directed by my son-in-law's father, the way conversations always are when there's someone at the table who believes they are the most important person in it. He talked about a development in Phoenix that was going to revitalize a struggling neighborhood. He mentioned a state senator by first name. He referenced a vacation they'd taken and how the villa had been adequate but not up to what they were accustomed to. My son-in-law nodded along. His mother smiled at the right moments. What do you do with yourself up in Flagstaff? My son-in-law's father asked me eventually. The question landed like an afterthought. I garden, walk, read. I have a workshop in the garage. Workshop. Woodworking? Some. Mostly I just tinker. He smiled at his son. Keeps the hands busy. Like I was a golden retriever that needed a chew toy. My daughter reached across the table for the breadbasket, and her sleeve fell back. There was a bruise on the inside of her wrist, old enough to be yellowing at the edges, maybe 4 or 5 days. She caught me looking, pulled her sleeve down, looked at her plate. I said nothing. I kept my face even, took a sip of water, listened to my son-in-law's father explain the virtues of his investment philosophy. But something cold moved through me and settled low. Old habits. I started watching differently after that. Not obviously. 34 years had taught me how to observe without appearing to. I noticed the way my daughter apologized for the food being too warm, then too cold, then for my grandson making noise from the other room where the sitter was with him. I noticed my son-in-law's father correct her twice at the table, once about something she'd said to his wife, once about a restaurant she'd recommended to me weeks ago, that he apparently found inadequate. I noticed my son-in-law say nothing both times. You know, my son-in-law's father said, leaning back in his chair, I've offered these two a place in our development outside Sedona. Beautiful land, investment property, but they could use it weekends. Your daughter doesn't seem interested. He glanced at her. Some people don't understand the value of building something that lasts. I understand it fine, my daughter said quietly. You understand the idea of it. He smiled. Fletcher, tell him about the Sedona project. My son-in-law began talking. My daughter stared at her glass. After dinner, my son-in-law's parents moved to the living room for drinks. My son-in-law joined them. I found my daughter in the kitchen, stacking dishes in a way that suggested she was grateful for the task. I can help, I said. I'm fine, Dad. The bruise on your wrist. She kept stacking. I bumped into the corner of the bathroom cabinet, she said. Which corner? She turned on the faucet. The water ran. I stood with her in the kitchen for a while, drying what she washed, neither of us saying anything important. When I left that night, she walked me to my truck. The desert air had cooled. My grandson was asleep. The lights from the living room threw long rectangles across the driveway. I'm glad you came, she said. I'm glad you let me. I looked at her. Call me this week. She nodded, hugged me. I felt the tension in her the same way I'd felt it when she was 12, and trying not to cry about something she didn't want to admit had hurt her. I drove back to Flagstaff with the window down, and the desert dark around me, and my mind already doing what it had done for 3.5 decades without permission, building a file. I got home and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. My handwriting has gotten worse since I retired, but the habit never left. I wrote the date. I wrote what I'd observed, the bruise, the color, the location, the way she'd pulled her sleeve, the way she'd said I bumped into the bathroom cabinet without looking at me, the twice-over corrections at dinner, my son-in-law saying nothing. Then I wrote a name at the top of the page and circled it, my son-in-law's father. My daughter called on Wednesday. Her voice was flat in a way I recognized, the kind of flat that comes from having cried recently and dried out. She said my grandson had an ear infection. She said things were busy. She said she might not be able to make it to Flagstaff the following month like we'd planned. Are you all right? I asked. I'm just tired, Dad. What are you tired from? A pause. Everything. 3 weeks after the dinner, I got a call from my grandson's preschool. The director, apologetic professional. They were reaching out because the account was now 60 days past due. The emergency contact listed was me. Had there been some mix-up? They understood families were sometimes restructuring payment responsibilities. I sat down. My son-in-law's father had agreed, at the wedding, to cover the cost of my grandson's education through primary school. It had been announced over champagne, like a benediction. My son-in-law had mentioned it to me later as evidence of his father's generosity. The school confirmed that the account had been removed from the Whitmore family billing in February. My name and information had been added in its place. I paid the bill that afternoon. The total was $6,200. Then I called my daughter and asked her to meet me for lunch. Not in Scottsdale. Halfway, in a diner outside of Chandler, I knew she wouldn't associate with either of our usual routines. She said she was busy. I told her about the preschool bill. Silence. Then, quietly, I didn't know they were going to do that. I know you didn't. Meet me Thursday. She was there when I arrived, sitting in a booth in the back, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. I sat down across from her. Take those off, I said. She took a breath, took them off. The bruise had faded but not gone. Above her cheekbone, the skin was still slightly discolored, greenish at the margins, more recent than the wrist. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Tell me, Dad, tell me, she told me. It had started with the inheritance from her grandmother, my mother, who had died 4 years ago and left my daughter a trust of just over $300,000. My son-in-law's father had offered to manage it. He'd framed it as a family investment, part of a development project, something she'd see returns on within 2 years. He'd had her sign documents she hadn't fully read, documents my son-in-law had set in front of her and said were standard. The trust was nearly gone. He'd moved the money through a series of accounts she didn't have full access to, used it to shore up a project that had been hemorrhaging cash since the year before their wedding. When she'd started asking questions, my son-in-law had told her to stop making trouble. When she'd asked his father directly, he'd grabbed her arm and told her that if she spoke to anyone outside the family about this, he would make sure she lost custody of her son. He had lawyers. He had connections. She was a woman who'd grown up in a 2-bedroom house in Tucson. Nobody would take her word over his. I held her hand across the table. The diner was nearly empty. A country song played softly from somewhere. How much is left? Maybe 30,000. I nodded slowly. I need you to do something, I said. It's going to feel small compared to everything you've just told me. But I need you to start collecting documents, bank statements, anything with signatures, emails, any communications where he discusses the investments. Can you do that? Why? What are you going to do? I'm going to help you, but I need the paper first. She looked at me for a long moment. Dad, he has lawyers. Real lawyers. The kind that make problems disappear. I know. We can't fight him. Let me worry about that. She was quiet. Then, okay. I drove home through the desert with the sun going down ahead of me, orange across the rock formations, the sky going purple at the edges. Margaret would have called it cinematic. She said that about sunsets, about good meals, about moments in our life that felt too large for ordinary words. I missed her every day, but some days the missing had a specific shape to it, and this was one of them. I needed her steadiness. I would have to make do with my own. Over the next 6 weeks, my daughter sent me documents in batches. Scanned images, forwarded emails, screenshots. I built a folder, then 2 folders, then a binder. I had a friend in Phoenix, a woman I'd worked with for 12 years before she retired from financial crimes, who was willing to look at transfer records and tell me what she saw. What she saw was wire fraud. What she saw was forged authorization signatures, my daughter's name on documents that did not match her actual signature on any file the bank had on record. What she saw was the systematic dismantling of a beneficiary trust by someone who understood exactly which mechanisms could be exploited and which paper trails were hardest to follow. I thanked her and told her I'd be in touch. I did not rush. That was the thing people never understood about the work. The instinct was always to move fast, to intervene before more damage could be done. But intervention without preparation was noise. The evidence needed to be solid. The timing needed to be right. I had learned this the hard way, early, in the first decade, before I understood that patience was not inaction. Patience was the foundation everything else was built on. In late April, my son-in-law called me. He was cordial in that surface way of his, the way he had been when he was first dating my daughter and trying to make a good impression. He said his father wanted to have dinner. He said there were some things to discuss. He said it would be good if I could come down Saturday. I said I could. I arrived on time, brought nothing, said nothing notable on the way in. The dining room felt different than the last time, colder somehow, despite the season. My grandson was not at the table. When I asked, my son-in-law said he was with the sitter, that this was a conversation for adults. My son-in-law's father was already seated at the head of the table. His wife was beside him. My daughter sat across from them, hands in her lap, not looking at anyone. He didn't wait for food. "Let's not dance around it," he said. "Your daughter has been making some fairly serious accusations about family finances, spreading stories to outside parties." He looked at her briefly. "The way you look at a document you've already decided is a problem. We thought it would be better to address this directly as a family." "She's my daughter," I said. "I'm not an outside party." He smiled the smile of a man who has never needed anyone to agree with him. "You're a retired truck driver from Flagstaff. No offense. None taken. Here's what's going to happen. Your daughter is going to stop asking questions about things she doesn't understand. She's going to focus on being a good mother, a good wife. And you," he looked at me directly, "are going to stay in your lane. Because if you don't, I will make the next few years of your daughter's life very complicated. I have lawyers who handle exactly this kind of situation. Custody evaluations, character assessments. It's amazing what a skilled legal team can establish about a person's fitness as a parent." He let that sit, "especially when there are concerns about the extended family. Mental health history, financial instability." My daughter was looking at her hands. "Your wife had struggles," he said. "Not a question. Depression, that sort of thing can run in families." "It can," I said. "My lawyers would know how to use that." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "I have some questions about the investment structure, specifically about the transfers from the trust in February and March of last year. The authorization forms." Something shifted in his face, almost imperceptible. "Those documents are confidential. They're her documents, her money, her signature on the authorization forms. Although when I had those signatures compared to her signature on file at the bank, there were some notable differences. Would you like to see the comparison?" My son-in-law stood. "I think this conversation is over. Sit down, Fletcher." His father's voice was sharp. "Let him talk. He's a retired truck driver with a legal pad. Let him get it out of his system." I reached into my jacket pocket and set my phone on the table. "I have documented $312,000 in transfers made without verified authorization. Forged signatures on 2 separate investment instruments. Wire transfers crossing state lines. An email correspondence where you explicitly instructed Fletcher to move her funds before the quarterly review could flag them." I looked at him. "Those are federal issues, not state." He laughed. It was a good laugh, practiced and unhurried. "And you're going to do what with that? Report it to whom?" "I have dinner with the county DA twice a year. Federal crimes don't go to county court." Something moved behind his eyes. My daughter looked up for the first time. "Dad, what are you doing?" "What I should have done sooner," I said. He moved fast for a man his age. He was around the table before I registered he'd stood, and he grabbed my daughter's arm at the wrist, yanked her from her chair. She made a sound I will not forget. "You want to talk about what I'm capable of?" He squeezed. "This is what you're playing with. This is what happens when you think you can threaten me in my son's house." "Let go of her arm," I said. My voice was level. "Or what, old man? What are you going to do about it?" I picked up my phone. Dialed a number I had memorized so long ago it had become part of my body, like the combination to a lock I'd opened 10,000 times. "This is Ruland. Who's calling?" The voice on the other end was younger than I remembered. They always were, after a certain point. "It's Norman Cates. I need you to patch me to Morrison in financial crimes. Tell him I'm on scene at a domestic assault in progress, and I need a team at—" I read the address from memory. I'd looked it up on the drive down. "Tell him I have 3 months of documented wire fraud, forged signatures, and interstate transfers. Tell him the primary subject is present." The grip on my daughter's arm loosened slightly. "Who are you calling?" His voice had changed. I kept the phone at my ear. "FBI field office. I used to know the hold music." I looked at him. "They'll be about 14 minutes from Scottsdale. Traffic's light on Saturday." He let go of my daughter's arm. "You're bluffing." But his face had gone a color that wasn't a bluffing face. "Badge number 88411. 34 years, financial crimes and interstate fraud. My last active case closed in 2019, the Brennan Alda Securities matter. 22 defendants, all convicted. My supervising agent was Assistant Director Patricia Holloway out of Phoenix Division. I set the phone down on the table, still connected. Would you like me to continue? My son-in-law's mother had gone very still. Why, he said slowly, would you hide that? Because I wanted my daughter to be loved for who she is, not for what her father could do to people who hurt her. Because I spent 34 years making enemies, and I have a grandson. I stepped toward him. But you stole from her. You hurt her. You threatened to take her child. So, the lights through the front window changed. Red and blue, slow rotation, the particular quality of official presence that I had watched land on people's faces for 3.5 decades. My son-in-law made for the hallway. I had anticipated that. There are 2 agents at the back entrance, I said. Running is noted. It'll come up. They brought him back in 4 minutes. The lead agent who came through the front door was someone I recognized from a conference in 2016 before I retired. She was sharp, moved through the room the way people do when they've done this enough times to know where everything is before they see it. Agent Cates. She looked around. It's been a while. Retired. Just Norman now. With respect, sir, we don't think of you that way. She held out her hand. Walk me through it. I handed her the binder. I had made a copy. I always made a copy. She read for 2 minutes, then looked at my son-in-law's father. Sir, I need you to remain where you are. I want my lawyers. You can call them. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can be used against you in federal court. She looked at her partner. Read him in. My son-in-law's mother began crying. The kind of crying that is mostly about the situation having departed from the expected script. My son-in-law was already in a patrol vehicle. The Harvard MBA, the man who had set fraudulent documents in front of my daughter and told her they were standard, sat with his head down and did not look up. My daughter stood in the middle of the room, arms at her sides, staring at me. Dad, it's all right. You were FBI. For a long time, yes, you told me you worked in transportation logistic. I did. Just for the federal government. She laughed. It was the particular laugh that comes out when someone has been holding their breath for years and finally exhales. We stayed in the house that night. My daughter put my grandson to bed. I sat at the dining room table and walked the agents through the documentation, the timeline, the chain of custody for the financial records. It was past 11 when they finished. My daughter found me in the kitchen making tea. Why didn't you ever tell me? I set 2 mugs on the counter. When you were growing up, I was working cases that could get complicated if the wrong people knew who I was. We moved 3 times before you were in middle school. Mom said it was for your job. It was. Just not the job you thought. I poured the water. When I retired, I wanted to be your father. Not the agent who put people away. I didn't want that to be the thing between us. I handed her a mug. I wanted you to know me without all of that. She wrapped both hands around the mug. He called you a truck driver from Flagstaff. He did. And you let him. It was useful. I sat down. Men like him tell you exactly who they are when they think they're talking to someone who can't fight back. He showed me everything I needed to see. The theft, the way he treated you, what he was willing to do to keep you quiet. He did all of that because he thought I couldn't reach him. And you were building the case the entire time. Since March. She was quiet for a long moment. I kept thinking I was alone in this. You weren't. You were never alone in this. The preliminary hearing was 3 weeks later. I didn't attend. It wasn't necessary, and keeping a lower profile served the prosecution's preparation. The agent called me afterward. The defense had tried several angles. The federal judge had not been interested in the angles. Trial was set for mid-August. She also mentioned that the forensic accounting team had finished their full analysis. The total, including fabricated management fees, was closer to $340,000. Will my daughter see restitution? I asked. That will be part of sentencing. She should recover most of it. I sat on the back porch that evening and watched the sky go pink and then purple and then a deep clean dark. The saguaro in the yard threw long shadows. Margaret had loved this yard. She'd planted the desert willow along the south wall the year before she got sick, and it was still there, taller now, blooming in May like it always had. She would have been furious with me for not telling her sooner. And then she would have made coffee, and we would have sat out here, and she would have said something that reframed the whole thing in a way I hadn't considered. I missed her most at the moments when everything else was finally quiet. My daughter called a week before the trial. My son-in-law's attorney had reached out to her. He was offering a clean divorce settlement, full custody of my grandson, if she agreed not to testify about the physical abuse. The financial case would proceed regardless, but he wanted the abuse testimony off the record. "What do you want to do?" I asked. Her voice was steady. "I want to testify. I want it on the record. I want my son to be able to know someday that I didn't stay quiet, then testify. What if it complicates the financial case? The financial evidence is comprehensive. Your testimony adds context and it adds truth. Don't let them bargain away what actually happened to you." I paused. "But it's your decision, not mine." She was quiet. Then, "How did you do it, all those years, working cases, knowing things you couldn't talk about? Didn't it wear you out?" "Every major one. The first few years I thought the weight would eventually lift. It doesn't lift. You just get stronger under it." "How?" "By knowing why you're carrying it. You're protecting your son. You're protecting yourself." That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. The divorce was finalized in June. My daughter had filed in April on grounds of fraud and domestic abuse. My son-in-law did not contest the major terms. His legal team had larger concerns. Full custody went to my daughter. The house sold within 3 weeks. The proceeds were split per the agreement. No alimony, given the pending federal charges. My grandson held my hand outside the courthouse. He was 3 now, old enough to know that something important had happened and young enough to already be thinking about lunch. "Can we go to the place with the fish?" he asked. He meant a seafood restaurant we'd taken him to once, where there was a tank near the door. "We can absolutely go to the place with the fish," I said. My daughter looked at me over his head and smiled. It reached her eyes this time, all the way up. The trial started on a Tuesday in August, 103 degrees in Phoenix, the heat visible above the pavement. Federal Courthouse, downtown, Judge Rosalind Oakes presiding, a jurist with a reputation for close reading and no patience for theater. My son-in-law's father had spent well over $200,000 on his defense team. It showed in the binders, the exhibits, the careful technical language they'd built around the argument that what he'd done was aggressive but ultimately authorized fund management within the scope of the investment authority my daughter had granted. The prosecution's argument was straightforward. Documents, signatures, transfers, timeline. I testified on day 3. "Please state your professional background for the record. I was a special agent with the FBI for 34 years, financial crimes and interstate fraud. I've testified as an expert witness in over 90 cases. And your relationship to the victim in this matter?" "She's my daughter." The defense attorney tried the obvious approach. A father protecting his child, emotionally motivated, unreliable. "Mr. Cates, isn't it true that you have a personal animus toward the defendant?" I looked at him across the table. He looked smaller than he had at that dinner. They always did, eventually. "I have evidence that he committed federal crimes against my daughter. My feelings about him are not relevant to the documents. But you've characterized him as—" "The documents characterize what he did. I collected and organized the documents. The jury can read them." The judge looked at the defense attorney. "If you have questions about the evidence, ask them. If you're attempting to impugn the witness's character, you'll need more than implication." The attorney sat. My daughter testified the next day. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have finally decided not to be afraid anymore, when they have realized that the fear was always about having something to lose, and that the thing they were most afraid of losing, themselves, was the one thing no one could take. She walked the jury through the documents, the emails, the night he'd grabbed her arm, the threats about her son. When the prosecution asked why she had stayed silent so long, her voice was even. "Because they told me I had no power, that I was nobody, and my father was nobody, and we couldn't fight them." She looked at the jury. "I believed that until I found out it wasn't true." He did not testify. His attorneys had counseled against it, correctly. The jury was out for 5 hours. On the count of wire fraud, guilty. On the count of securities fraud, guilty. On the count of theft from a trust, guilty. On the count of witness intimidation, guilty. He was seated in the second row. I watched his face. Not with satisfaction. Just watching, the way I had watched 100 defendants absorb that moment, the exact second when the math of their choices landed. Sentencing came 8 weeks later. Judge Oakes reviewed everything carefully. When she spoke, she was direct. "Mr. Whitmore, you had substantial advantages in life. education, resources, opportunity. You chose to apply those advantages to stealing from a young woman who trusted you with her future. When she discovered the theft, you used physical force and threats against her child to keep her silent. You believed your money and your connections would protect you from consequences. She looked at him over her glasses. They did not. 6 years, federal facility. Full restitution of $340,000. 3 years supervised release. As they took him out, he turned and looked at me. I had seen that look before, many times, in many courtrooms. Not anger. Something closer to bewilderment, the particular bewilderment of a person who has built their entire understanding of the world on the belief that some people are simply beyond reach, and who has discovered, too late, that this was never true. I didn't say anything, just watched him go. Outside, my daughter had my grandson on her hip. He was looking at a pigeon with the full concentration of a person who has not yet decided what pigeons mean. "It's done," she said. "The legal part." "Yeah." She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was small and something had frightened her and the fear was leaving. "The rest takes longer." "It does, and it goes." My daughter found work at a documentary photography collective in Tempe. She began shooting again, first small things, then longer projects. She sent me a photo she'd taken of my grandson asleep, in a shaft of afternoon light through the window of our old house in Tucson, where she and I and my grandson had spent 2 weeks in September while she figured out her next step. She was proud of it. She should have been. Margaret had been right about her eye for things. My grandson started preschool at a small place near my house in Flagstaff. I had moved him and my daughter in while the Scottsdale house was selling, and after that, somehow, the arrangement had simply continued. My daughter found an apartment 8 minutes away. We had dinner on Tuesdays. We went to the zoo on Saturdays when the weather cooperated. My grandson developed opinions about which animals were worth the walk, and which were not. "The penguins," he told me seriously one afternoon, "are always worth it." I agree completely. Linda from across the street, who had known me since I moved to Flagstaff, and still brought casseroles around when she sensed something was wrong, stopped me on the sidewalk one morning in November. "The whole neighborhood's been talking," she said, with the satisfaction of someone who has enjoyed being right about a person for a long time. "Everybody's saying you took down some big real estate man from Scottsdale. I helped with a federal case. Norman." She looked at me over her coffee mug. "You can say it." I smiled. He made some poor choices. The evidence was there. The system worked. The system worked because you knew how to use it. I thought about that on the walk back to my house. The appeal had been filed and denied. My son-in-law's father was at a federal facility in Arizona, where the weather was fine and the accommodations were not. My son-in-law had completed his community service and was working somewhere unremarkable. He sent child support reliably. My daughter said he seemed changed, more careful, like someone who'd looked over the edge and decided to step back. I hoped it was genuine. For my grandson's sake, I hoped it. One evening in December, I sat in my workshop with the garage door open, the cold Flagstaff air coming in off the pines, and turned a piece of juniper on the lathe. It was slow work. That was the point of it. My daughter came by unexpectedly, let herself in through the side gate the way she always did, appeared in the workshop doorway, with her hands wrapped around a thermos. "You're still at it," she said, just turning. She leaned in the doorframe, watching. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" I turned the lathe off, considered the question properly. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that you went through years of it before I understood what I was seeing." I set down the tool. "My actions? No. I did what needed doing." "You waited a long time." "I waited until the evidence was solid and the moment was right. There's a difference between waiting and doing nothing." I looked at her. If I'd moved too early, his lawyers could have buried it. He had the resources to make that happen. I needed it to be airtight. She nodded slowly. "He thought you were nobody. A lot of people have thought that. It's never been a problem." She laughed softly, came in from the doorway and sat down on the old stool my father had built. "He called you a truck driver. I drove long haul for 15 years. That part was accurate. You know what I mean." I did. Men who believe power is about what you own, and who you know tend to underestimate men who spent 34 years watching other men like that make exactly that mistake. I looked at her. He thought I was coming to dinner. I was building a case. "Is that what you do everywhere you go? Build cases?" "These days I build furniture. I gestured at the juniper piece on the lathe. Slower. Fewer subpoenas. She laughed. The real laugh, not the careful one. The one that had come back over the months. The one that reminded me of when she was 15. And thought something was genuinely funny and couldn't hold it in. My grandson appeared at the workshop door, having climbed through the fence from the backyard where he'd been playing, or more likely discovered the gate was unlatched and wandered through because he was a person who followed open doors wherever they led. "Grandpa," he said, very serious. "What?" He held up a stick, a good one, forked at one end, about 2 feet long. "Can you make this into something?" I took it from him, turned it over. The fork was clean, no rot, interesting grain. "I can." "What?" "Don't know yet. We'll find out together." He accepted this with the gravity of someone who has been told a reasonable thing, climbed up onto the stool next to his mother, leaned against her arm. My daughter looked at me over his head. The workshop was warm with the smell of sawdust and juniper. The cold came in from the pines beyond the fence. "Thank you," she said, quietly, "just for me." I turned the stick over in my hands. That's what fathers are for.